So today I had an interesting question that I wanted to talk about. How do people still like and talk about Mass Effect? For context, Mass Effect 1 came out in I think 2007, Mass Effect 2 in 2010 and Mass Effect 3 in 2012. So why do these games that are over a decade old still have a lot of people talking about them, whether it be on places like Reddit or on YouTube with people still making video essays about them? Well, first of all, it helped that the Mass Effect Legendary Edition came out. It released in, I think, 2021, and what it did for the series is it's kind of the definitive way to play these games, and what it did most importantly is I think it just brought in a lot of new players, because the barrier to entry was, I wouldn't say high, but like if you're playing Mass Effect 1 for the first time these days, you can see it shows its age for some people. I still quite like it. I think it held up for me quite well, actually. I think it still looks pretty good. But the one thing that new players will see is that Mass Effect 1 just did not have great combat. It works, I get what they were going for. They're going for like a, you know, like in Deus Ex where you have to like level up your shooting skills to be able to shoot more accurately, stuff like that. They try to do that in a game like Halo, which, as it turns out, wasn't such a good idea because it presents itself as an action RPG with a lot of action and some RPG, but as you'll especially notice at the start of the game, you won't have anything leveled, so you'll miss a lot. Like, if I'm aiming at an enemy that's standing 5 feet away from me, I think half of the bullets will just fly off in another direction, which I thought was annoying too the first time I played it, although I stopped noticing it when I played it for more. They got rid of that with the Legendary Edition, so that's pretty good. You know, it's stuff like that that makes the original series a bit of a higher bar for entry. But it's funny because even before the Legendary Edition released, Mass Effect was still such a beloved series by people who played them originally. It was still, even, it wasn't just the Legendary Edition that blew new life in it. Even the like original games from 2007, 2010, you know, were still very much beloved and talked about. And I think that generally they held up pretty well. At least they aged less noticeably than some games from its era. Let's just call it that. And Mass Effect still was, even like when the Legendary Edition released, fairly unique in what it tries to do. I'll get more to that later, but you know, as I said, the thing that the Legendary Edition did for Mass Effect is it brought in a lot of new players, because, you know, it's a new game, it has shinier graphics and better gameplay. It is the definitive way to play these games, so it kind of helped a lot of new people to get into it, which, you know, got a lot of more people talking about it and experiencing the Mass Effect magic for the first time. But the Legendary Edition still needed a foundation to work off, because it just, like, it upped the original games. It didn't change anything story-wise, which is something interesting to note. The original trilogy, as I said, is already very much beloved, very much talked about. But these games were just so good and unique, and keep in mind this is coming from a massive Mass Effect fan. I don't think I'm the most objective when it comes to Mass Effect. Just keep that in mind. But what I think the original Mass Effects, they still need to be good for people to talk. Not necessarily, of course, you can still talk about a bad game, but generally the way people talk about it must mean that these games are good, and they are. What I think Mass Effect does very well, first of all, it's very unique, as I mentioned before, in that there's a lot of games out there, a lot of role-playing games, a lot of sci-fi role-playing games, also a lot of probably better games than Mass Effect. I can admit that myself, but there's nothing quite like Mass Effect and the specific things it tried to do, and there wasn't anything else like it at the time or even now. People have tried, you can see that a lot of people have taken inspiration from Mass Effect, a lot of developers in their games, and the reason why it is unique is, I think, personally mostly because of BioWare. Because BioWare has, if you've any idea who BioWare are, you know any of the games, you can see that they have a sort of track record for the types of games they make. It's usually role-playing games with a very much character-driven story. Usually the story takes a bit of a background to like engaging in characters, and even the way they do the characters is usually very BioWare-esque with the romance and stuff. You can compare it to Bethesda game, I think, because Bethesda games are very unique in their own sense too, because they're usually, you know, they're about like building a cool world and then just throwing shit in it, and just giving the player the agency to explore that world. Like Fallout 4, the Elder Scrolls series, stuff like that. I think BioWare as a developer really is fairly unique, I'd say. Not a great developer, especially not nowadays, but unique. So yeah, one aspect of why Mass Effect is still so beloved is just because it's unique, and that's because of BioWare, because a BioWare game is a BioWare game. I feel it's, for me personally, I think it's a very, it's like an entity, just like a Bethesda game. There's nothing quite similar to this. RPGs that are similar, you know, or even settings, but just a BioWare game, you know, the full package is unique to BioWare games, funnily enough. I'm not saying like even BioWare, they're not the best developers. They made a lot of mistakes. So with the Mass Effect trilogy, they made a lot of fuck-ups. Kyleng, I don't think I need to say more. That's pretty much, I think that kind of, these days, that kind of symbolizes the fuck-ups of like BioWare. Kyleng, just not even Mass Effect 3's ending, just Kyleng. Also, as I mentioned before, there are games that, you know, are better in specific areas, but what I think Mass Effect does exceptionally well. First of all, I like that it's something fairly unique. I've said the word unique so many times in this video, but Mass Effect does a lot of cool things. What Mass Effect does, for example, is you can import your save file from previous games. There haven't been many games that do that. I think The Witcher did it, but not particularly successful, because if you import your save file from The Witcher 2 and The Witcher 3, there's basically, I think there's like, on the wiki, there's like a small list, less than a dozen from the top of my head, of things that it actually impacts. You know, it's tiny. I'm pretty sure it's also in the original, like, Baldur's Gate. It's in games of, like, Pillars of Eternity, stuff like that. That hasn't been done by many big games, big RPGs. So that's pretty cool, because even though the implementation, it's very hard to implement, so usually a lot of stuff comes down to the same, like no matter what you picked, it comes down to pretty much the same, or like a different cosmetic, you know, whatever. But what I like is just the small touches that it brings, in that if you made a decision in Mass Effect 1, like a character comes back in Mass Effect 2 and talks about your decision. It's very basic, but I like, because it feels more like a personal story, like something that you really create. And Mass Effect is one of the few big games, like big RPGs, to offer that kind of experience, because, you know, games like The Witcher, of course, have these save file imports, but it's never, it feels just kind of there, you know, like, oh hey, let's throw this in there. It doesn't do much. And with Mass Effect, it's kind of a selling point, actually. So yeah, that's cool about Mass Effect. Also, the universe is just, I think, you can tell, because BioWare, before Mass Effect, they worked on Knights of the Old Republic, which was a Star Wars game, and Mass Effect feels like a Star Wars. Well, not, I think it'd be unfair if I call Mass Effect a Star Wars ripoff. But you can tell they took a lot of inspiration from Star Wars. And I don't know if this is a controversial opinion, but if I have to choose, I think that Mass Effect actually has more potential than Star Wars does. I think that the Mass Effect universe is, for me personally, more interesting than Star Wars. It's just a shame that outside of these games, there's been comics, but I feel like the universe has been fairly underutilized of Mass Effect, whereas Star Wars, you know, I don't think I need to say much about the topic. I think Star Wars has been milked to death, especially now. There's like so many different series that are like based on Star Wars stuff that are coming out on Disney. Mass Effect really never had that, like, they never tried. I think they had like an iOS app, they had the comics, of course, I think they had like an anime, no, it was like an animated movie about Vega, I'm pretty sure, from Mass Effect 3. Outside of that, mainly it just came from these 3 games. But what I liked about these 3 games is that in just Mass Effect 1, actually, they did it so much to establish this universe. And I think Mass Effect is, for me, one of the most interesting sci-fi universe out there. I think it's one of the most unique, because I feel that it took a lot of things from Star Wars, but did them better. Like, I think the biotics are just a better version of the Force, or stuff like this. Because the Force in Star Wars is just like an omnipotent entity. Like, it's very... It's basically just like the writer's inserts. If they wrote themselves in a corner, they can just throw the Force at the wall. With Mass Effect, I think what's more interesting is that the biotics really feel like something that can be... It has some sort of scientific basis, in the Mass Effect universe at least. And that's what I like. I think that they really thought about it. Speaking of scientific basis, what I like about Mass Effect personally is that it's so very realistic, in that they really tried their best to establish that it's something that's... I think so far our universe is the same as the Mass Effect universe. I think what happens in the Mass Effect universe in the future that's different is that they found like ancient relics on Mars, which, you know, is theoretically possible. But what I like is Mass Effect just feels very grounded. It's humans. It's just a very human story, and all the things that happen in the series generally are theoretically possible, which I like. It isn't just some different universe. It is our universe. It can be our future. And that's just... I think it's super fascinating to stuff to just speculate about. And what I like is just... It's so well done. I think it's so well thought out, the universe. So many little things that are like... I think what Mass Effect does is it thinks about the little things that other games will most likely overlook, or other developers. Little things that make this universe all the more believable, or like in-universe callbacks of events that happened like before the events of the game, which explain why certain individuals have maybe racist beliefs or xenophobic, which is just like everything has a reason. I think generally in the Mass Effect universe, I think some stuff is just you know, BioWare wrote themselves in a corner, now they need to get out. But I think generally it's just very well thought out, and Mass Effect, the universe just has a lot of little details and stuff that they clearly like thought about well, and you can tell that they went into the series with a sort of plan of what they wanted to do throughout the trilogy. I don't get the feeling they just made stuff up as they went along. I feel like they very clearly built up towards certain reveals and stuff, and I very much like when games do that. So one last point, which I think is important to mention, is just the characters. I really like the characters. What helps is that if it's just Mass Effect 1, the characters wouldn't be particularly, like, they wouldn't stand out all that much. They would just be, you know, fairly generic alien characters. But what helps is that some of them come back throughout the trilogy, and you can see them grow, you can influence them, you can... Like, a lot of them have a very satisfying character arc. I don't think Mass Effect has any bad or uninteresting characters. Even Jacob, which is like... he gets hated by the community. I think, like, in any other game he would still be, like, a good character. It's just that in Mass Effect he's kind of outshined by all the other interesting characters. I don't think he's that bad, although I don't think he's all that interesting, especially compared to some characters. But, you know, as I said, it's just, like, these characters... You get really like invested in them. They sort of become your like in-universe friends. You start to care about what happens to them, or you might even go for a romance or something like that. The characters all feel very human, even though most of them are aliens. And in especially Mass Effect 2, there's just so much of a focus placed on developing these characters and seeing them come back throughout all these games, and, you know, having their little rules and stuff. It's very nice. I think it's something that these games do very well, and which makes people very invested in them, because they just grow to like the characters and they want to see what happens to them. So I think generally that's about it, and that's why people like Mass Effect. Very unique game, very cool, very nice. You should play it if you haven't. Thank you for watching. Bye.